Hi, this is Adam Ballinger, and I have a really cool piece for you today. I'm going to talk about the hamstrings. I've noticed a bunch of comments and technique things come up about how to work your hamstrings on the yoga mat, and although a lot of them have a lot of great information, there's a few pieces that commonly get left out. So I hope this helps. We're not going to cover everything today, but this little part that I'm going to bring up could be huge and change what you do with your hamstrings. So the hamstrings, if this is your pelvis, this big circle in the middle, and this is your femur or your thigh bone coming down, your hamstrings roughly attach to the sit bone or the ischial tuberosity, kind of at the back. Some of them attach towards the back of the thigh bone and don't even go up to the pelvis. And then their attachments down here, most of them come down just below the knee, and they help us when the muscle contracts between A and B. It bends everything there, so it can help you bend your knee and lift your foot back up behind you. And then even more cool is that because some of it connects all the way up to the pelvis, it can also help you pull the entire leg back, which is really cool and really important. And we'll get into that on a different day. Now, this place from A to B, A is what we would call the origins of the hamstrings, and down here, B would be the insertions. Whenever the distance between A and B becomes short and stays short for an elongated period of time, the tissues begin to adapt to that. And if you change the circulation or sedentarism and things like that, sometimes the tissues can adapt even more intensely. If the distance between A and B is abbreviated and you're very active, let's say you're riding on a road bicycle and your back is really rounded and your buttocks is kind of tucked under and you're using your hamstrings, not only is the distance from A to B abbreviated or shortened, but you're also exercising the muscle and it's developing. It's not adapting to the short distance solely, it's also adapting to the activity in muscular development. And that can make it really tight, really fast. When you feel the tight hamstrings between A and B, or origin insertion, one of the things that you're very often feeling is the symptom of what's gone on in the pelvis and in the low back. Some people feel like they have tight hamstrings, but their movement is beyond normal ranges of movement and motion. They're just feeling a stretch whenever they fold forward. But a person with a really tight hamstring issue, their hamstrings are so tight, and I'll talk about a little bit about how this can happen. They're so tight that they're pulling the pelvis down at the back, which makes the lumbar shift back and become flat. This can become a big movement issue, and it can reciprocate the issue. So if you develop a tight hamstring, it can cause you to tip your buttocks down and flatten your low back. The flat low back can create other movement dysfunction, and over a long period of time can also put the intervertebral discs at risk of wearing out and potentially even rupturing and stuff like that to the backside. So hamstrings, tight hamstrings, can be a really big problem. I mentioned that the hamstrings can be a symptom of the movement and position of the pelvis and lumbar spine, which means a lot of times that the muscles and ligaments and tendons and stuff like that up above the hamstrings, they're becoming displaced, which allows the pelvis to tip. And what it takes to keep that from happening is oftentimes developing better posture here and better strength and endurance. If you get this. If you're sitting in a chair and your head is here and your hips, draw an ear, and your hips are out in front of you, one of the things that's happening here is the body, it's not going to lose its connection. I've talked a little bit before about how this can create some other issues. But as your spine is here without any major support directly under this low back area, if this goes on for much of a duration, a period of time, almost always, this is going to begin to round, which is that flat, or we could also say flexed lumbar. If this persists and is related to a movement dysfunction, we could say it's a hyperflexed lumbar or hypolordosis. It doesn't have enough of its curve. So sitting for a long period of time without your hips directly underneath you almost always leads to the pelvis tucking and then the distance from A to B becoming even more short. So sitting and having your back round can be a cause of your back losing its position with a symptom of your hamstrings getting short. And one of the ways to work on it, besides stretching, because if you just stretch the hamstrings, but you haven't addressed the lumbar issue, most likely, as soon as you sit down or walk around with your overly elongated or maybe under-conditioned low back, the hamstrings are going to get tight again, or at least they very often will. So for some folks, approaching the back issue before the hamstrings issue becomes a great way to change what's going on there. We can get into hip flexors and all this other stuff, but one of the real simple parts is begin to bring balance to your pelvic position and your lumbar position. And when you go to stretch your hamstrings, only stretch the hamstrings as much as you can maintain this optimal position in the low back. I would agree that folding forward to stretch your hamstrings and rounding your low back is this wonderful stretch sensation all the way through the low back and the hamstrings. But sometimes stretching with the rounded low back exacerbates the back issue that leads to hamstring problems. So I would focus, at least for a little while, you can experiment with this, only flexing at the hips. So no rounding at the spine. And for a lot of folks, you'll probably even have to abbreviate your yoga pose so that you don't take the lumbar and the pelvis out of optimal position. So try only stretching your hamstrings while you can muscularly maintain neutrality up in the low back and the pelvis. Those two are connected. As soon as the curve in your low back begins to diminish, and most specifically in the lower 2 to 3 vertebrae, as soon as that arch begins to diminish, the pelvis begins to tuck and the hamstrings get short. The other part about sitting is once the leg is out front and the knee is bent, the bottom, remember how the hamstring comes below the knee, so sitting has a double whammy where the hamstring origin to insertion is automatically going to be short because of the bent knee. But when you tuck the pelvis or sit with kind of collapsing posture, and this is sometimes, if you caught the piece, related to what we call vertical spinal creep, and it happens in almost anybody. If you sit, even if you started with your hips directly underneath you, if you sit long enough, to some degree, this is going to begin to happen in almost everybody in the test results that I've read about. So we're going to create a double whammy where your pelvis is collapsing and your knee is bent, and if you sit for a long period of time, you have even longer for the tissues in the hamstring to adapt to this short range of motion. So first of all, sit up tall. Second, maintain an optimal curve. And develop the curve so your hamstrings don't shorten so quick and easy. And if you are sitting a lot, make sure you stand up every once in a while and focus on your back posture before you focus on your hamstring stretch. And then develop the skill and ability to stretch your hamstrings with the back posture that's going to be related to longer, durable, open hamstrings. All right, this is Adam Ballinger. I hope this changes some of the ways that you think that your back strength and durability and posture is directly related to your hamstrings. If you've been chasing open hamstrings for years and you've always been stretching with a rounded low back, or you've never sought to create that condition in the back, or even the stretching pattern where you move at the hip and hamstring but not the low back, if you've never thought about that, something to try on your yoga mat and see if it helps you out. All right, this is Adam Ballinger. Hope to see you again soon.